Do you have anything we could play for Chicago? This is regarding Chicago. I have a Chicago theory being formed here.
Here's a good one.
Think the deer wearing Kevlar vests.
How's that?
How's that? Yeah, that's actually very fitting, as we'll see in a moment. So what I have here is a collection of headlines and a collection of stories that all came out within, oh my goodness, I don't know, just a breath of each other. I'm going to start out with, what should I start out with? I'm going to start out with the Lightfoot story. This came out on Fox, and it's simply headlined, Chicago Mayor Lightfoot denounces toxicity in public discourse days after shouting F. Clarence Thomas. This was just for fun, okay, folks? We're just having fun here. Democratic Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot is attempting to strike a more civil tone just days after cursing out Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Speaking at an event on Tuesday, Lightfoot decried attacks on police officers in her city, suggesting it's a sign of people, quote, losing respect for the institutions of our democracy.
Oh, Lightfoot saying that? Okay. I wonder why that would be Lori Lightfoot.
It's the same mayor who really kind of has been, you get populists get a bad name. You got Trump. Oh, he's a populist. Yeah. He just does what the people want of him. What an evil politician. And Lori Lightfoot's really just a populist in the other direction. You know, she was all during the 2020 Black Lives Matter, defund the police, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. At least in rhetoric, she was all about it. And recently shouting F. Clarence Thomas in front of a big crowd of people after the Roe v. Wade thing. And suddenly she's like, oh, nobody has any respect for institutions anymore. Quote, that says to me, this is her talking, that says to me that the people who are acting so brazenly have not only no respect for themselves, but they don't have respect for the institution, like the police department, who men and women every single day on every watch are literally risking life and limb for our safety, Lightfoot said. Literally. Quote, but toxicity in our public discourse is a thing that I think we should all be concerned about, right? Lightfoot added, right? Look at this funny picture.
Yeah, they
Fox chose
the most.
Oh, Fox is on fire right now. They are so funny. You got to remember, they're not quite. I mean, they're as all corporate media is entertainment more than anything. But Fox really makes it entertaining. This photo of her looks like she's mid
transforming into a goldfish.
Something, yeah, kind of a goldfishy look on her face. After alluding to the horrific massacre in the North Chicago suburb of Highland Park, which we'll talk about in a second. Oops, I got lost. So sorry. Lightfoot stressed the importance of community and urged residents to respect each other and focus on what brings us together and not what tears us apart. Quote, that's the thing I think that concerns me the most about what we're seeing really over the arc of these last 2 years. I get it. People are angry. They're frustrated and they're fearful, Lightfoot said. But we can't let those things mean that we lose sight of each other's humanity. We've got to find a common sense and a purpose. Quote, every single person has a role to play in healing the wounds that are plaguing us and blah, 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 blah. You get it. Funny Fox pointing out hypocrisy thing. And this was just the first because suddenly Chicago started popping up everywhere. And this one was a bit more powerful here. This was from the Washington Post. It's being mirrored by MSN. The headline, with little outcry, Chicago's bloody weekend eclipsed Highland Park toll. No new counseling resources were announced this week on the city's impoverished south side, even after a man was shot to death in broad daylight, feet from a playground, days before July 4th. There are no crowdsourced charity drives raising millions for victims as families in Chicago, where the holiday weekend death toll reached at least 10, with 62 injured, numbers that exceed the death toll from July 4th parade shooting in nearby Highland Park. In that affluent lakeside suburb, the violence was an anomaly. Here, it is a grimly regular occurrence. Quote, they have a lot of resources there in Highland Park, said Bobby Brown, 62, who watched the nationally televised law enforcement response and community outpouring from her home in the Englewood neighborhood, down the block from where the homicide near the playground happened Friday afternoon. Quote, ain't that something? Our babies see people get shot while they're at a playground, and there's no counseling. They have to suck it up and deal with it. This year's holiday violence was tame in Chicago compared with the previous year, when more than 100 people suffered gunshot wounds and 17 died, according to the Chicago Police Department data. That is the same weekend last year. 17 people and over 100 people shot in Chicago in one weekend. Or Brown, a community activist and organizer, describes herself as the neighborhood's big mama. She flies 2 American flags above the front door of her duplex. One is red, white, and blue. The other, red, black, and green, is known as the Black Liberation Flag. Her property is a neighborhood safe haven, she said. This spring, a young man was shot down the block and came sprinting into her yard, resting on her gazebo deck as she tried to render first aid. Police arrived. She said they watched and waited for an ambulance, their body cameras activated, but did not assist. Quote, I've never seen so much blood in my life, Brown said. Quote, I looked up at them. No one cares. No one said anything or even gave me advice on what to do, but they're recording me. A detective later told her the man was pronounced dead at the hospital. Brown did not have the names of the officers who responded to her home, and Chicago police said the Washington Post would need to file a Freedom of Information Act request for details about the response to this incident. And it goes on. It does actually mention Lori Lightfoot here. Since taking office in 2019, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot has significantly boosted mental health funding for communities affected by violence, announcing last month that her health department would award an additional $3.1 million to 12 nonprofit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But residents touched by the weekend's violence said the need for help far surpasses what is available and easily accessed.
Let me just say, from the last article about Lori Lightfoot, and just because she's brought up here again, and I forgot about what the thought that I was going to say earlier from the early article, but I didn't mention it. And then this, I was actually going to say, Lori Lightfoot is sort of displaying the attributes of kind of a split personality or a multiple personality, where on one week she's F. Clarence Thomas, and next week she's like, we must have civil discourse. It's a very what's the word, bipolar type of example.
You might call it bipolar or like a mental health issue in someone else, but the truth is she's a politician.
That's what I'm saying. No, but
all politicians are bipolar.
I get it, but that speaks to how this country is so polarized and so messed up.
Exactly.
Because we have our leaders displaying bipolar
from the top
tendencies.
Down.
From the
You're
top
exactly
down. That's what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah, from the top down, we have examples. The examples set by the highest ranked, highest sitting power centers, not just the president, but even locally. Some would say local politics is more important. And when your local politicians are just as flip-floppy and seedy and bipolar and everything as the higher politicians, it becomes a symbol of power, a symbol of being correct, a symbol of what a pinnacle of citizenry. This is what a good citizen acts like. Gets mad and has sort of episodes of back and forth depending on when it serves them. And then it's hilarious when they come and complain about why is everybody so mad? And it's because we learned it from watching you, Lori Lightfoot. So the point of this article was really, and they go through a very long, detailed article about many of the shootings that happened over the weekend. And the point is, this white kid shoots a couple people in a rich neighborhood and everybody hears about it. And it's about gun violence and he's a Trump supporter. And so, not only you can see it from the conservative side and you say, oh, it's because he's a Trump supporter and it's politically motivated and they want to take away our guns. And from the side of these Chicago residents, it's a similar criticism, just on the different side, which is like, oh, no, you just pay attention to that killing because it's a white kid and it's it's a rich neighborhood and that's shocking to people. And it's, you get more money and fundraisers and focus your aid and your charity on this rich neighborhood where we have that many people dying every weekend and nobody's raising money for us because, our people aren't Trump supporters killing people. They're just Chicagoans, which speaks to a lot of the deeper themes. But we're moving on because we're seeing a trend here. Now, this one was the kicker. After I read this one, I'm like, what is going on with this Chicago storyline, this arc, this milieu that's being installed in the mainstream software? This is from The Atlantic. Again, we've pointed out forever, notorious non-news outlet, but cultural engineering factory. And when you take the previous articles into account and wrap it all up with this little piece of social engineering from The Atlantic, I think things are starting to head in a certain direction. This is headlined, "Let's use Chicago rules to beat Russia."
Oh, Russia!
Russia.
Makes perfect sense.
Right? Because, what is a better way to influence the popular opinion about a tragically idiotic foreign policy than to use a domestic storyline to apply to foreign policy? Now, that may sound a little abstract, but let's get into it right now. And it goes like this. Karl von Clausewitz observed in his classic On War that, quote, "the maximum use of force is by no means incompatible with the simultaneous use of intellect. That means, in part, acting thoughtfully but with the utmost effort, understanding that war is more bar fight than chess game." Or, to put it in the simpler words of Jim Malone, Elliot Ness's counselor in The Untouchables, quote, "You want to know how to get Capone? They pull a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way, and that's how you get Capone." It's the Chicago way. It's still the Chicago way, Gons.
Yeah, it seems to be working.
Al Capone is an apt analogy for what the West confronts in Russia, a particularly noxious mix of mafia mentality, hyper-nationalist ideology, and totalitarian technique. Kind of sounds familiar. Elegance is not the Russian way, and it cannot be our way. This is the light in which one should measure the accomplishments of NATO's recent gathering in Madrid. Nuts. And I got myself a nice old paywall, but don't worry.
So do I.
So here's the, so we already, right off the bat, and I'm not going to get too deep into this one, but right off the bat, you have this reporting. You can almost see Lori Lightfoot doing it the Chicago way.
Yeah.
And you can see, obviously Chicago riddled with gun crime, being one of the most liberally ruled metropolitan areas or democratically ruled rather, metropolitan areas in the country, and has the most gun crime really imaginable. The amount of gun crime is really unimaginable. They have a Buffalo shooting worth of crime every single weekend. actually more than that, but you get the point. The tangible efforts. Now, let's get into kind of what they're talking here. The tangible efforts of what Western leaders announced were impressive in many respects, particularly the commitments to provide Ukraine with nearly 500 artillery systems, 600 tanks, hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition, and more. The question, as always, is whether these will be delivered as swiftly as they can be absorbed, and whether the United States and its allies are leading the target by putting in place now the infrastructure to prepare Ukraine for the weapons it will require and hopefully receive 1, 2, or 6 months from now, and for training the large forces it must mobilize. Now, that was a lot of words, and it was a pretty horrific run-on sentence for The Atlantic. But what they're talking about leading the target here, Gons, is the weapons and the ammunition, the things we are sending over right now, is not for the fight right now. It's for the fight in a year.
Right. 6 months, a year, 2 years. Yeah.
So leading the target is aiming ahead of a moving target. And that's what actually explains a lot of what we have going on. I mean, you've got the 40 billion plus another 16 billion, plus pretty much every week there's another 800 million being sent over or approved by Biden. And it makes no sense because we in the public, we kind of forget the longer term play here, which is absolute annihilation of Russian forces in about 6 months. Not right now, not today. So we live in this, we talk about the narrative crafting magicians and wizards that are the media, literally building a worldview that people base their entire lives on. And one of the deceptive parts about it is we hear about the happenings in Ukraine yesterday. You hear about the battle yesterday. You hear about the operation yesterday, or maybe even this morning. But then you hear about the aid being sent over, and that's for a battle 6 months from now. And so there's a huge discrepancy or perhaps even
lag.
Purposeful confusion or lag, in the way that people are perceiving what's happening over there, which is very effective for control of the population. But I'm going to skip down just a bit because it talks about, we're sending over destroyers and ships. We're giving them high readiness forces. We're building NATO bigger than it's ever been. Talking about the HIMARS, the missiles, the ammo depots that Ukraine gets the credit for destroying. The KKK. Yeah, see, isn't this great? Now that I had to do this, my highlights went away. Here, let's jump down to here. The Western allies will not invade Russia, nor will they overthrow its regime directly. One day, hopefully, Russians will do that. Putin is motivated by imperial fantasies of imitating Peter the Great and other even less savory Russian leaders. And Putin's successor, should the Russian leader die or become incapacitated while in office, will likely be no better. For evidence of that, one only need consult the ravings of key advisors such as Nikolai Patrushev. If and when the battles cease in Ukraine, Russia's intentions to expand and subjugate its neighbors will remain. Sure, Atlantic. Okay. The good news here is that if one sets aside misleading memories of World War II and the Cold War and disregard, so ignore history, it says, and disregard ominous mutterings of experts who exaggerate Russian capacity before the war, then it becomes obvious that Russia is a weak state. And it goes on and on again. A very interesting sort of breakdown. But here we go. I'm going to get to the thing. Come on, bring it back to Capone. Here we go. Yeah, the British Chief of General Staff. The British Chief of the General Staff. This is the end. Recently described the Ukraine crisis as a 1937 moment for the West. It was an acute historical comparison. In that year, the Sino-Japanese War begun, setting the stage for World War II. In that year, the West had before it choices that could have avoided the horrors of a far worse conflict, but it ducked. So they're saying what the West did right before World War II was cower and not play by Chicago rules. And because we didn't play by Chicago rules, World War II happened.
No.
To their credit, in the current moment, Western leaders are performing far better than did their counterparts 85 years ago. Oh, so all this disaster in Ukraine and sending the entire world into an economic recession, is the Western leaders doing better than the ones before World War II?
Yeah, but not lizard people standards.
Yeah, but not yet well enough. We're dealing with Capone. And while, like Elliot Ness, we need to stay within the constraints of law and basic decency, we also need to apply Chicago rules. Those
are not compatible.
Well,
things. Constraints of law and basic decency.
The Untouchables. That was the whole thing. Elliot needed to take down Capone, but he was a lawman, so he couldn't break the law, At least, I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, actually. I think that's what happened. So here's the point. The point is a lot of things about Chicago are being brought up. Chicago as a ruthless sort of an ignored place, but a violent place, an extreme violent place, being set up at the same time that their lead politician is doing the politician thing. The Machiavellian prince thing, say one thing, do another. And if it's better for you to, change your rhetoric, you just go ahead and do it. And then it applies straight across the board to Russia. Pulling in this idea of Chicago rules. And I think even in a more broader narrative deconstruction where, the violence in Chicago is happening every day, but we only pay attention to the distraction, which is the white kid doing the shooting or the Trump supporter doing the shooting, where the distraction gets the attention and stuff like that, where the Chicago rules are playing out and you don't pay attention. Same as with Ukraine and Russia. We're playing Chicago rules, or we should play Chicago rules over in Russia and Ukraine, but you're not supposed to pay attention to it. You're supposed to pay attention to the culture war and things like that. I mean, if you have eyes to see, the messaging is really incredibly clear and does not fare well for the future of, sort of a peaceful American life.
Well, I think this is almost a brilliant piece of not just propaganda. That's too easy. Yeah. But a reframing of a problem, an apologetic. Right, because the Chicago thing is a problem, right? Admittedly, in the political landscape in this country, the Chicago issue is a big one. So it's like, well, how can we make this negative, this violent uprising and all this, the gun problem in Chicago, and everything.
Right?
Yeah, this ignored problem.
And at the same time, the Chicago gun violence problem is a thorn in the side of the narrative.
Right. So how do we turn that narrative into a positive? Russia. We did it. Russia.
Exactly.
The only way to beat Russia is to take that Chicago rules, man. The Chicago mentality of, you slap me, I shoot you.
And isn't it just wonderful that, the African-American community in the Washington Post article is begging for somebody to do something.
Yeah.
And it's horrible. And it's a daily occurrence that people are getting shot. This poor woman has a kid die on her doorstep while police just record it on their body cams and nobody's helping. Nobody's doing anything about it. No outcry, no nothing. It's hell on earth to go through that. And then you have The Atlantic, Elliot A. Cohen. Let me tell you, Chicago, baby. That's what what we need to do to Russia. Let's go. It's just like a disgusting perversion of what Chicago rules, applying the very idea of Chicago to foreign policy while, our beautiful minorities are getting murdered in the streets.
Think about this, though, that for the black community in this country, this could be like we need, but despite our problems, we should send all these kids that are having issues to Russia to fight for the country. You
match that up with the article from last episode about how we don't have enough people in enough desperation to join the military.
Yep. Yeah. There you go. Boom, boom. It's all coming together.
Yeah.
You know what else?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm going to keep an eye out for Chicago stuff because this is way too much. It reminded me of the ramp up to the Supreme Court thing at the end of last year.
Yeah.
Chicago, man. Yeah. So watch out if you're in Chicago. It's
going to be used in some nefarious
Obama's from
way.
Chicago.
Obama's from Chicago. You got the Chicago Bulls.
Can't forget the Chicago Bulls.
Forget the Bulls, man.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, well,
from Chicago to China.